Hello, and thanks for tuning into the Urban Kingdom podcast. Before we get into this episode with Kwammaine Parsons, I wanted to give you an update on the Urban Educators Collective. We have an event coming up called the Urban Discovery Experience for anyone interested in teaching in an urban setting. It's designed for prospective staff, potential board members, those who wish to support urban education, or those who wish to start urban schools. The Urban Educators Collective has a goal of having 30 schools by 2030. Right now, I think we're at around 11 or 12 schools. And so, if you're interested in being a part of that, you can register. You can go to www.uecollective.org/UDE. www.uecollective.org/UDE. Okay, welcome back to the Urban Kingdom podcast. And today, my guest is Kwammaine Parsons. I first met Kwa at Urban Youth Workers Retreat, which is now called Urban Workers Retreat, about 5 years ago. We were put in the same icebreaker group, and short of an awkward introduction, we didn't interact much before 2021. Since then, Kwa has begun teaching at Times Peace Christian School here in York, which is a part of the Urban Educators Collective, which brings you this podcast today. And when he isn't busy with that, he's investing in his family and friends from all different walks of life. Like Manny in a previous episode, Kwa and I started together on our Urban Workers Retreat board. Registration is now open, and you can register at urbanworkersretreat.com. Born and raised in Philadelphia, PA, and being involved in several ministries at various levels, Kwa offers candid, valuable, and relevant perspective. Thank you, Kwa, for coming on the episode today.
Thank you. I feel honored to be part of this.
Yeah, and Kwa is from Philly, and we won't make any disparaging comments about Philly today. So, Kwa, I want to get right into your story. The format that we kind of follow here in the podcast is that we try to start out with a story, and then we'll break into other episodes into maybe more input or more thoughts. Me and Manny got started on kids clubs pretty fast into his story. We kind of went with it, but you have as much time here as you want. Here's some of the questions that I asked Kwa for the audience to know. What was it like growing up in the city of Philly? Want to hear more about your family culture and, any stories you have from growing up. How did you meet Anabaptist, and what were your first impressions? What and who made the most significant impact on you, and how? And then the last question I asked here is, did you already come from a religious background? Give us a little idea. What was God to you growing up, and what was the relationship like? I'll let you go.
All right. So I grew up in North Philly. My mom and my dad, it was 6 of us, and my oldest brother he still is mentally retarded. He actually lives in a home, and I'm the second to the youngest. There's 3 boys and 3 girls. So growing up, my mom was the block captain. So any cookouts, any block parties, any problems on the street was coming to her. So we had people in our house all the time. I remember, I think I was like 7 years old, and I distinctly remember a homeless person come in, or maybe they wasn't homeless, but they wanted food. And my mom went around to all of our plates and took a little bit off everyone's plates. Wow. And made up a plate for this person. Another time, my older brother, there was a guy in his class who got kicked out of his house. He was 7th grade, and they got kicked out of his house. And my brother snuck him in our house without my mom knowing. I think it was like at least 2 days, and then my mom found out, and she wanted to go figure out how she could take this boy in. And he went with his grandmother or something like that. And so my memories of growing up was playing at the park, playing manhunt in the neighborhood, swimming at the public pool, going for water ice and the ice cream truck, and it was all fun memories and stuff. My mom was known to be the strict lady on the street too, because curfew was curfew. School mattered. We weren't allowed to just sit in front of the TV all day like other families were, and we'd get mad. We'd be like, my friends at school can do it, why we can't do it? Or there were certain songs we weren't allowed to sing because how inappropriate they were. And at the time, we're like, well, our friends sing them, so why can't we? So growing up, my mom was very strict. but I don't ever remember like feeling like she was a bad mom. So when I was 10 years old, yeah, I was 9 years old, and my mom decided to start working. All of us were in school, and so she had free time. So she started working at a daycare at a church, and be through this working at this daycare at the church, she became a Christian, and we were going to church with her, and then leading up to that, my cousins was at our house one Tuesday night and was like, "Oh, y'all want to go to church with us?" And I was like, "Well, I didn't really want to go because church was never my thing. Like, nothing about church appealed to me." Anyway, she's like, "Yeah, everybody should go." And the church came. They're like, "Oh yeah, we'll take all the kids." And I remember thinking, like, what kind of people just went like? It was like 10 or 12 of us just hopped in this minivan. I think it was a minivan. Or maybe it's actually maxi van, but whatever. We all hopped in this van and went to church. And I remember going inside this building, and it was kind of dingy. And they're like, "Let's start singing." And they started singing. And I was like, how do you sing without instruments? This was the weirdest thing to me. Like, and I remember like just staring at people like, this is weird. And then we went to the basement to have our class, and I'm like, and they're like, "You're not allowed to talk. And you're not allowed to do this." And I was just like, this is stupid. And I was like, why would y'all ever want to come back to this place?
Right.
And then we left or whatever, and like everybody except for me like had fun. And I'm like, I'm not going back. So years went on, or a couple months went on, and they were all going back, and it was Christmas. It was my 10th birthday, and New Year's. It was a New Year's service at my mom's church, and I remember her and my dad telling us after that. They said, starting from now on, you have to go to church, like either 6th Street or their church they were going to, which was a Baptist church. And I didn't want to go to either. So my sister was like, "Won't you come to church to 6th Street? Because at least they have snack afterwards." And I'm like, "All right, let's easy. Let's go that one." Even though theirs was longer, they had snack afterwards. So we went there for church. And that was, it was fine. Like I just tolerated it. Like, anyway, it was March of 2000. I forget the year, but it was in March, and my mom got sick with this real bad fever and stuff, and then she was like out for like on the couch for a while, and then she went to the hospital, and then she got better, and then the one specific night she went to the hospital, and she was not feeling well. And she came back, and she said that then in the morning she said the hospital just gave her ibuprofen. She was like, "I gotta go to a different hospital." She said something is not right. And my older brother, he's the second oldest, was like, "Well, can you wait till we all go to school and then go to the hospital?" And she's like, "Sure, she'll just wait." And that morning she didn't. As we were getting ready, I was on the 3rd floor. That was my bedroom. That is where my bedroom was. And I remember hearing a bunch of commotion downstairs. So I like finished getting ready and went downstairs. I'm like, seeing an ambulance, and I'm like, "What's going on?" And like, they're like, Mom, you fell down the steps," and like, they don't know what's wrong. And so my grandma came over, and my aunt and uncle, my dad went to the hospital. And then I remember my aunt being there, and she's like, "It's okay, like, don't go to school today, like, she'll be fine, like, they're taking care of her, like, you don't have to worry." And I remember like feeling a little uneasy about it, but then I think I got to a place like, okay, she's fine. Like, I just took a deep breath, and she's fine. And then I remember my grandma coming in the kitchen, or coming in the house, and looking at us and just shaking her head, and tears falling down her face. And then my uncle was crying, and I was like, and my sisters and brothers, and I'm like, what is going on?
I'm going to take your time.
And I just remember my grandma looked at me and just was like, she's gone. And I was like, what? Like, I was still kind of confused. And then all of a sudden it hit me like, my mom is dead. Mm-hmm. Like, she's never coming back. And I remember going to my room and slamming the door and like yelling at God. And like, in my heart, I'm like, he's not real. There's no way he will let this happen to a child. Like, I remember people from both churches like came and was like, just like talking to us and like, yeah, they just like came to comfort, and I was just like, I didn't want to be comforted. Mm-hmm. Like, don't tell me like God is good. Don't like I don't want to hear that. Like those are like my 10-year-old brain. That's like I remember wrestling with that. Like, I remember even praying that if God, I said to God, if you will bring my mom back, I will do exactly what you want me to do the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. I won't argue. I won't anything. Like I won't. And I was just like holding on to this hope. Like holding on to this hope. And then I think it was at the funeral where like I was like, no, he's not bringing her back. And so then that's when it really started for me, this journey of like, it's kind of crazy because I was only like 10 years old. But the whole journey of Christianity, like, I wrestled, like, is this real? This can't be real. And like, but yeah, there's people that were still wanting to invest in my life that say, like, you know, I think one specific person who she said to me, she's like, I know this is hard. She's like, what you're facing is not easy. And she's like, I know you don't want to believe in God. And she wasn't there to try to convince me. And I think that's what, like, resonated with me. Versus those people that was like, it's going to be okay. And, like, I remember feeling like, it's not, like, you can't say that. You've never been through this. Mm-hmm. Like, don't say it's going to be okay when you never walked through this.
Right.
And just kind of through that process, we went through grieving counseling. And actually, I went through the longest. Like, it took me the longest. My brother, he ran away from home because he thought it was his fault. He's like, if I would never told her to stay. So there was a lot of, our family wrestled a lot with feeling guilty, feeling like, what could we have done to change? Like, yeah. And different things like that. And so, as we moved forward, my dad, he wanted to take care of us, but then there was like, my aunts were like, oh, well, you can't take care of all these kids by yourself. Let us take them and blah, blah, blah. And my one aunt took us in, and it was obvious it was for the money. Mm-hmm. And that, just living there was like, it was hell. Anytime somebody wanted to do something nice for us, it was a problem to her. And so just from the age of, it was about 10 and a half maybe. It was about June, June or July, we moved in with her till I was about 17.
So just a quick question. Was there ever a concept of father figure in your life? Because you didn't mention at all your dad.
So my dad was the workaholic. He was there, but definitely was that provider. Like I'm the man of the house, mm-hmm. or I'm gonna go to work, I'm gonna pay the bills. Like that's kind of how he was. So my mom was definitely more involved than he was, and yeah.
Yeah, you can keep going. It popped in my head that Manny had mentioned I don't think he ever knew his dad. And I had my dad, and I lost him going on 6 years now, before I really became an adult. So I really needed him, in my adult years especially. Like, man, I really need my dad. Like, but I didn't really want a relationship with him until it was too late. So would you say that you ever had a relationship at all in with him, or was it more of like those were the terms? Like, I had a relationship with him, but only as far as he was a provider for me. There wasn't a whole lot of confiding there.
There was there was a relationship. I mean, he went with us to the pool if he was off work. I remember one year for Christmas we all got bikes, and he put all the bikes together, and he went with us on a bike ride. So there was some relationship there. I remember taking interest, and I wanted to make a cake, and my mom is not a baker, and so he showed me how, or like, I mean, it was a box mix, but it was still like, so there was some. The relationship definitely died out after my mom died.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you mention just a few of probably wasn't very frequent or very often experiences. I look back at my dad and I'm like, we went mini golfing one time. That might have been the only event we did together in a 2-year span, other than hanging out at the house or whatever, or Thanksgivings. Like, but I look back now that I have forgiven my dad and I love him. He was fully forgiven before he passed away. I look back fondly on the little moments I did have. So it's interesting to hear the impressions that even just a few of those personal moments leave on a kid when they grow up. But anyway, continue.
So kind of fast forwarding, I lived in Philly most of my life. We lived in Georgia for about 2 years. I did not want to move, and then I didn't want to move back to Philly. I actually really loved living in Georgia. And just like a year or two ago, I told my wife, what if we just move to Georgia? Like, actually went to the extreme of like finding the house where we used to live in Georgia. Anyway, moved back to Philly, and I think when I was about 15 years old, I remember being questioned about Christianity from my friends, like from public school. And I remember all discussing, like, we all believe in God. And some people actually would say they believed in a higher power. And they don't believe a specific God, but they believe there was a higher power. And I remember discussing this at church. I started going back to 6th Street, and I remember discussing this. And I was challenged with the thought, like, well, what do you believe? And it wasn't this, like, believe what I believe, but more like, but what do you believe? From certain individuals. And I remember Shannon, he just took interest in my life. He knew my story, and he just took interest. Let's go on a bike ride. He'll just call me up, see how things are doing. He told me, come over anytime. And I think, like, I was like, okay, he's cool, whatever, But I think when, like, he's like, yo, you can just chill at my house if you want. Like, we're not going to be there, but you can. I think that's when I'm like, this guy really trusts me. And, like, it's not this, like, oh, here's my project.
Our school spotlight this episode is Tidings of Peace Christian School. They've been in operation for 28 years in the city of York, Pennsylvania. You can find out more about them at tidingsofpeace.org. They're hoping to start a vocational arm of their school in the next few years. You can learn more about that at tidingsofpeace.org. And of course, Tidings of Peace is a part of the Urban Educators Collective. Find out more about us at www.uecollective.org.
And then he invited me to live with them. So let me back up a little bit. We did some one-on-one Bible study, and I love the fact that Shannon was never pushing an agenda. If we got through our lesson, or if we got sidetracked, or never even opened the book, he was fine with it. And that was, like, really good for me for where I was in life. And that's what I think was like, okay, if this is what Maronite's about, then I'll be okay with this.
So why don't you think he had, like, some people are very structured, right? Like, I mean, most of these, let's look at kids clubs or any kind of event, there's a schedule, there's a plan. And if a kid would, let's say, require something in a different order or require that kind of grace, they're not likely to get that. So what do you think maybe in Shannon was what compelled him to be so loose and patient with you? What has to exist in a person for them to be that kind of way with somebody?
So at this point, Shannons were living in Philly, had their own house off the Mission compound at 6th Street, just doing their own thing. So for one, it was at their house, very relaxed atmosphere. It wasn't in like a classroom. It wasn't, so that made a difference. And I think just instinct, like being okay with saying, you know what, we don't have to do things traditionally. And maybe he had this desire and just was like, I'm going to go with it, even though like, if it gets back to the big Mennonite circle, like, oh, this is how you run Bible study, or this is how you did this, and be kind of like looked down on. Mm-hmm. But I think he just went with like, this is what I think is best.
Yeah.
Because even Norma, like, I think even going back to the whole idea of feeling valued, or when I realized like they really invest in my life and care about my life, it's when Shannon just let me in his house with his wife. Mm-hmm. Like, not every guy is going to let a teenage boy at their house with their wife, or we drove somewhere, to Lancaster County. Mm-hmm. It was just like stuff like that. I'm like, it's more, they're valuing me instead of saying like, oh, here's our checklist. Like, we did this with them. We did this. It was more like, we want to invest.
Yeah. So a couple of things I'm hearing is, one, he didn't do things by the book. Like he was very, he wasn't confined to any system or program, any step-by-step process. He was potentially maybe even learning and working while you were, right, which is common. Mm-hmm. But also I think that there's obviously some kind of genuine love and a desire to relate to you as a person, as opposed to just looking at, this person has a soul and they're going to go to hell and I need to preach the kingdom or whatever. And I think, I would assume, because it's very common, because there are people like this, but they're not, unfortunately, not the norm. That most people are confined to a system, program, or a way of doing things, and they have to learn to work outside of that over time, if they ever do.
Yeah, I believe that he definitely was learning along the way, because today we talk about it and we like just talk about different things we did and places we went, and just like he helped me go, like we went to the bank and opened up a checkings account for me. I got my license and he let me drive. He taught me everything I know about driving. Being just part of their families, it was just like, there definitely was other people along the way as well that had influence. I don't want to neglect that at all. I just look at Shannon and Norma as like just pouring unconditional love. And then they bought a house and they asked me, they said, if you would paint a room, what color would you paint it? And I'm like, burnt orange. That's my favorite color.
Interesting, but continue.
And then, I don't know how long later was, they had invited me to come see their house. They were done painting it, ready to move in. Or they might have moved in already. And we went upstairs to see the rooms, and the one room was burnt orange. And I was like, wow. They're like, yeah, this is our invitation for you to come live with us. And this is your room. And I was like, couldn't believe it. And funny thing is, that week, they had an adoption of one child. And then they picked up another child from the hospital that week, and I moved in all in 1 week. Wow. And
so they didn't pause their life at all. You were a part of their life genuinely.
Oh,
it wasn't
yeah.
like they had to say, well, in a few weeks when we're more, or a few years when we're more stable, or more whatever, we'll invest in Kwa. There was a love there that made it so that, well, you're here now, we're here now. This is what we want to do.
Mm-hmm. And like they felt, Norma felt fine asking me, hey, could you help do the dishes or feed the baby or change it? Like, well, I never changed diapers, but you know, just being there. Can you run to the grocery store? And I'm like, I could drive your car by myself. Like, I got my license. They're like, yeah, go in. Like, so just like move right in and like, here, like, there's work. We need to, this is part of living together. And I think that's just what made it go. I mean, I was still in school, so I was still going to school, whatever. But it was just like, I was like, Norma, I said just recently when we were talking about it, she's like, it was another set of hands that can help out with the little ones. And so for her, it was more a benefit than like.
So she was actually blessed by it.
Yeah.
So you weren't necessarily seen as just a ministry or a something that we do because God wanted me to do this, and we don't know how we're going to keep loving Kwa. We don't know how we're going to keep putting up with him. She saw you as a blessing.
Yep.
Yeah.
And even like, if I had off from school, I'm like, oh, I'll cook dinner tonight. Like, give you a break or whatever. And I mean, I worked too. And so we just work. I mean, we have fun together though. We didn't necessarily go out to eat but we would, if one of the kids were kind of fussy, like, oh, like, let me go for a walk with them or something, or, whatever. And we just did stuff. We went to Kwammaine together. We went out for ice cream and just did like a bunch of Dunkin' Donuts. Just small little things that like all we need to do these small things and just talk and invest in each other. And like that's what did it for me. And it wasn't until I was 18 I realized church was great. Church was thriving at that time, and I was just loving our church. And I remember getting a paper, and it was like, here are some of the problems we see in church. We need to discuss this. And I remember thinking, like, what? We got problems in church? Like, I never. And like, I think there was a couple years where 6th Street was allowed to be 6th Street. And it wasn't this like dictatorship over us telling us how to do church. And we were doing church the best we knew how. And I feel like we were thriving. Well, I know we were thriving, and church was full. Fellowship meal was fun. There was a functioning youth group. Like, there was programs happening, and there was stuff outside of programs happening. I remember Bible school. There wasn't much of a schedule throughout the days. It was 2 weeks of Bible school, and 18, 20 people moved down for 2 weeks. And there were some days where it's like, go play with kids, go hang out with kids, go, and that's all you did. And you could walk outside the door and there's people there. And things were thriving. And when I got there, I was so confused. I remember going to Shannon like, what's this even about? And he just like shook his head. Like, and the funny story is backing up, when I got baptized at 6th Street, the bishop, the Mid-Atlantic bishop, came to me and gave me this little blue book. And I was like, what's this? And he's like, it's the rule book for Mid-Atlantic. I didn't even know what Mid-Atlantic was. I'm like, oh, well, okay, whatever. Anyway, he walked by and like gave me this book, leaves, and Dan comes by next, who was the pastor of 6th Street at that time, come by and just takes out my hand and said, don't worry about this, like, it doesn't benefit you right now. I was like, okay, whatever. And then fast forward to when I was 18 and see these, our churches having issues. And then it like that blue book. He started with going against stuff in there. And I remember saying right in our meeting, I never read that thing. And people kind of chuckled and laughed. And like, looking back, I realized that was like very unconventional in the Mennonite meeting or whatever you want to call it. But I just flat out was like, well, I didn't read it. Like, what's it?
Yeah.
And so, as I was moving forward, like, church, like, and then I moved to Lancaster, and then my eyes opened wide, and, like, I feel like it took me, like, 5 years to understand Mennonite. I still don't understand it all.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize all the different denominations and all the different, I just thought everyone was the same group of people, like, and I remember, like, visiting churches, and I remember going to a Eastern church, I think it was, and someone, and I didn't know what it was. I just was going to go visit. I saw the name, like, well, I'll just try this out. And some of my friends laughed. It was like, they would never go to that church. I'm like, oh, like, I don't want to go back either. Mm-hmm. And, but it's interesting that, like, from my perspective, I stepped into this, like, wow. And so, like, I think when people step into urban settings and they think, wow, like, there's a lot of, like, stuff happening in cities, that's how people feel when they step in Mennonite culture.
Yeah, there's just so much to unpack.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for listening to our podcast today. Kwammaine and I will pick up our conversation in a future episode. You can find out more about our podcast on almost any platform where podcasts are found. If you want to go to our website, you can go to uecollective.org/UKP. See you in a couple weeks.